Hello, welcome to an incredibly special episode of the Coding Train. I have a guest here for you today. This is incredibly exciting for me. Have I said incredible too many times? It is incredible. John Henry Thompson. If you're not familiar with John Henry Thompson, please check out this video's description, his website, the link's there, but better yet, just keep watching this video. Now, I want to introduce John Henry Thompson in a particular way, relevant to me, because I think I can say that this channel and the kind of stuff that I do on this channel would not be here if it wasn't for the work of John Henry Thompson. So one of my main jobs here at New York University right now is to teach a course called Introduction to Computational Media. And my whole beginner Learn to Program with Processing and P5JS, those are really videos that go along with that course. Learn to program from the very beginning. It's 2018 currently at present. That's what the date is today. I took this course in 2001, which I think is 17 years ago. Carry the 17 or whatever. At the time, I took that course and I learned to program in a piece of software called Macromedia Director with the Lingo programming language. And guess what? John Henry Thompson, the guest today, invented the Lingo programming language. And Lingo and Director are a big piece of the history of creative coding. It's what I would think of as one of the main predecessors to the kinds of languages and environments that I teach with today, whether it's processing or JavaScript with P5JS. John Henry Thompson, in fact, so I took that course in 2001. At the time, Dan O'Sullivan was teaching that course. He's the chair of ITP currently. And he also took that course in 1989. And guess who taught the course in 1989? John Henry Thompson. So the course that I spend most of my time teaching here at ITP, one of the original teachers of that course is John Henry Thompson. At the time, he was teaching it with a piece of software called HyperCard. That you may or may not have heard of. I encourage you to research. At the time he was working for Macromedia, he invented the Lingo programming language, and he's going to tell you a lot about that. A couple things to say. As always, I'm kind of a little bit terrible with sound and stuff, and there's a little bit of clipping with his microphone. Apologies for that. I think you'll be able to understand everything he says. Also, towards the end there, I ask him a few, so he's going to do a presentation, then I'm going to ask him some questions. I kind of it's very awkwardly staged. I really wasn't being very thoughtful about where I was standing and where he was standing, because I was just so interested in all the things he had to say. So apologies for that. One of these days, I'll get better at kind of figuring out how to do interviews and have guests on this channel. But that's all I have to say. Without further ado, I'm really excited to have here on the Coding Train, choo-choo, John Henry Thompson. Thank you, John Henry Thompson.
Okay, well, welcome. Thank you, Dan Schiffman, for inviting me here to back to ITP. I left ITP back in 1997. I taught here for about 10 years, starting with a couple of classes, animation, intro to computational media, which started out with HyperCard, if anybody remembers that. But that was the main programming, authoring environment that was designed for non-programmers to do creative stuff on the computer. So we transitioned, started in HyperCard, then as director, I was working on director at the same time, and then as director got to be kind of comparable to HyperCard, I started using that in the class. And that, like I said, that ended in 1997, and so I've been sleeping for like 30 years, and I just woke up, and this is all this wonderful technology around here. What I wanted to talk to you about today is the history of people that are trying to make the computer more accessible by creating softwares that are designed for non-programmers to do creative stuff with the computer. So I'm going to go back and talk about what influenced Director, which was the main authoring tool that I worked on up until 2003. Most of the stuff that I'm going to be talking about is on my website, johnhenrythompson.com. It's over here, over here. Over here. So, and I have a little tab there called History, which has most of this stuff, and also some videos of some of my more recent work. What is Director? I have a little video I'm going to play that describes Director. I'll click on it here.
The most powerful authoring tool for multimedia production is targeted at design, graphics, animation, and video professionals who need precise control over their interactive productions. Director features a complete paint program, graphics and special effects, frame-by-frame animation control, 2 channels of sound, and Lingo, an easy-to-use object-oriented scripting language. Director is the most popular application available for creating corporate presentations, CD-ROM titles, simulations, kiosks, digital publications, electronic reference materials, and more.
So that's Director. As you heard, it's really like the kitchen sink of creating interactive content. People use it to create games, instructions, simulations. But its key thing was that it was easy to use. It was designed for non-programmers. It had all the tools in one place for editing your graphics, managing your graphics. It was also started in 1995. It was cross-platform. So you could create your stuff on the Mac, which was where most creative professionals started, and then take it to Windows, which was a scary place for a lot of people. But there was a lot more people consuming content on Windows in 1995 because that's when they made the PC a multimedia PC. So you had built-in CD-ROM, built-in sound, built-in stuff we take for granted now. That's the transition to multimedia, and then a few years after that was the internet came in, and that was another kind of revolution. So that's Director, kind of a summary. Also, I have two examples. There was tons of content done in Director, from museum kiosks to art projects, which is a problem now because beginning at the start of last year, 2017, Adobe decided to retire Director. So it's going to be harder and harder to play content. I don't even have the application anymore. It's been a couple of years. So that's a dilemma. People that are in the digital world, digital archiving world, are worried about this, because stuff is not just with Director, Flash, a lot of other digital content is just going to slowly evaporate from our heritage because it's not available anymore. So here are two clips using Director. This is by Joe Sparks. Okay, so Joe Sparks did this. This was in the CD-ROM era. So this was an interactive music video game. And the backstory was you were teleported to this other dimension where you had to produce music videos as a form of energy. And so that was the overall gist of the game. You had to mix together these music videos, but he had thousands of these little mini games in it. And this is a demonstration of one of those mini games, Sledgehammer. So basically you had these two robots banging each other out, but there was, great sound effects all around, and some interesting mini games.
I destroyed you.
Another example. This is actually done by Okira, pause this for a second. Okira Rasai, who was a graduate of ITP back in the 1990s, and he did this as a project in my class. He was doing a lot of content around Kwanzaa, celebrating Kwanzaa, educating people about Kwanzaa. So this was an interactive Kwanzaa CD that he created. And tragically, his son was murdered, and he passed. He died soon after that. I think it was last year, so very recently. So this is to you, Okira. You're back at ITP, kind of. Okay, here we go. So this is Okira's Kwanzaa. So this is an interactive menu here, explaining the different things that go into celebrating Kwanzaa, the candles and the different principles that you acknowledge on each of the days. And you would click and get some more information about it. So that was what Director was. People used this to create their own interactive content. People started companies and launched careers, transitioned to new careers using it. But what I'm going to focus on in my talk is the evolution of Lingo, how Lingo came to be, and what is fulfilling that aspiration of making programming accessible to the masses and given an on-ramp to really making interactive content for the widest possible audience. So Lingo started, I guess these are the main features of Lingo was that it was a dynamic language, so that you didn't have to declare anything. You could use integers and floating points and strings interchangeably. You didn't have to worry about memory. And as object-oriented it became more common, it adopted the object-oriented features found in other programming languages. And then also it was cross-platform, so the same code that you wrote one place would work in another place. Here's a little bit of example of the syntax of Lingo. This is Fibonacci, which I've learned is misnamed, but Fibonacci numbers, this is a Fibonacci number sequence, which is a classic way of, classic beginning, like hello world for programmer type of thing. So that's an example of the syntax. Lingo was influenced, what I try to do is bring in as much of what I found in other programming languages that was powerful and easy to use, and brought it in. Not so much from the syntax from Smalltalk, but the object-orientedness. Smalltalk was the first language to incorporate classes fully. The other language oops, let me get rid of that influenced Lingo was Lisp. I got introduced to Lisp when I went to MIT I arrived there in 1977, and it blew my mind because I had up to that point, I had learned programming in high school in 10th grade, learned BASIC, which was a beginner's programming language, and then I was fortunate to get into a computer lab and work after school in the computer lab, and there I taught myself the traditional programming language, Fortran, PL1, assembler, but all those languages were about manipulating numbers. And Lisp was the first language I saw that wasn't focused primarily on numbers. It was about, it was symbolic manipulation. And also, the same way that you express the language as lists, that's the same way that data was managed. So data and program was interchangeable. And it's just fantastic language. So, the first thing I did one of the first things I did was write a Lisp interpreter. In high school, I was fascinated, to fulfill my fascination with languages, I wrote a BASIC interpreter. So I was used to, figuring, I was fascinated with how languages work and how to actually build them. So, I was, like I said, Lisp was a powerful influence, and kind of weird thing now, AI is coming back. Back then, Lisp was the main way that you did AI. And I think when I was at MIT, there was one, like an AI bubble. They built a symbolics machine where half the lab went to the West Coast. Tons of money poured into it, to build a machine specifically to run Lisp. And now AI is, AI is very, very popular now. The other major influence was BASIC, and I didn't borrow much from BASIC other than the concept of making it easy to use. And so here's a little bit of BASIC back from the day where you just typed into a terminal and you had to number every line. And I guess, traditional programmers scorn on this now because you were locked into using goto. So that's crazy. All right, the other influences, which I don't have an example syntax for, I didn't have time to put that together, is HyperTalk. So HyperCard came out in '85 and introduced this notion of stacks and an environment where people could write code very quickly, and it was the first language I saw that didn't talk in math talk. Instead of H and Y, it had horizontal and vertical, and so it kind of flipped the script on introducing people to programming by using a human readable vocabulary. And in terms of referring to properties, you used an expression like the background of card 10, so you didn't use dot. It was a more English-like language, and they extended that into AppleScript, but then that kind of fizzled. I think mainly due to the internet. programming went back to the, especially with JavaScript, went back to being something that programmers, and if you wanted to do coding, you got to pay the price and learn the lingo, learn the language, the math, which I kind of regret that's happening, but that's the way it is. The other influences at that time, this is in the late 80s, early 90s, was ScriptX, which was a product sponsored by Apple, which was going to be a multimedia language for Apple computers and all that. In fact, they formed a company, Collider, that was going to create this author and environment built on ScriptX. It went belly up, and Director and Lingo survived, which I'm very proud of. And then another company called Metropolis, which had a killer interface. It was very behavior oriented. So you drag and drop behaviors rather than writing a lot of script. And it was a great interface, but they had some problems. They weren't cross-platform enough. You could do simple things quickly, but you couldn't scale. It didn't scale well. And so Lingo didn't have that problem, so it survived. It survived a good 30 years, so that's good. So the other thing that came on, actually fairly recently, or late in the life of Lingo and Director, was integration with JavaScript. And I think that's, I left Macromedia in 2001, went back briefly, and that's the main thing I did was put JavaScript in, integrate JavaScript into Director so you could either use Lingo or JavaScript. The other thing that happened is, the emergence of Flash, and Flash had a good run. In fact, it's still going. They announced that at least the Flash product is getting retired. I think 2010, 2020. So we got a few more years for Flash, but people have this. People have the same concern that it's, there's all this content that's going to disappear because Adobe has chosen not to make that software open source, and so if it were open source, at least people that were interested could put it to work in and keep it running on newer hardware. So that's a challenge of products like Flash and Director, is that they're proprietary, so you're at the mercy of the company about what their lifetime is, independent of how much interest there is in it. And I know it's complicated because as software gets more complicated, it licenses other software to be used in it. So if it starts off as a commercial software, it's harder to make it a non-commercial software. But what I'm doing now is I'm still very interested in making computers and programming accessible to the mass, to everyday people. But my focus has been in the past years on JavaScript and some other environments. Most of my personal work is done in native code, which is Swift, Objective-C and Swift, and stuff that's done in a browser. Of course, has to be based on JavaScript, and it's pretty healthy. It's going on a couple of revisions now, so it doesn't look like it's going away. The other environment that I use and use in some of the classes that I teach is called Scratch. It's a software that's designed to be the beginning programming language for as early as kindergarten or middle school. And what I like about Scratch, particularly for beginning programmers, is that it's a visual environment. You drag and drop the blocks to construct your program. I'll click on a sprite here. This is one of the dots that's marching across the screen. That's the code for it. And it's a community where you can easily share your work. So you can, if you see a Scratch project that you like, you can quickly clone it and then make your own variation on it. And the community is pretty diverse. There's very young students on it, kids on it, and older people that just come there to play. So I like that open environment, open-ended environment where you're learning by playing and you're doing it because it's fun. So that's the kind of learning I'd like to encourage. The other tool that I use, which is not as popular but I'm still hoping that it'll have some appeal to some people, is CodeHS. And this is a more traditional learning environment. They teach web technology, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript in a more traditional way. But I see what they're doing, and I like it because it makes it easy. They have a package that high school teachers can adopt, and it's structured around a curriculum, and there's an end certification that you can work towards, an AP Computer Science, so you can get college credit for it. So it's very, very good in that regard. You get something very tangible, actually, that can save you some money. And I think my thinking is, I haven't seen it yet, but my hope is that people can get excited about the technology with the open learning environment like Scratch, and then get the certification and the classic, what they call math rigor, which scares people, but from something like CodeHS. The other thing that I'm working on is a software called Dice, which is my my creative software, which is all open source. It's built on open source technology, and it uses JavaScript as the main kind of driver for the user interface. It's available on the Apple Store now, so you can, if you go to the App Store and search for Dice CPU, all one word, it'll come up, or go to my website and click on the Dice tab and click on the link to get to the App Store. The version of Dice that's in the store doesn't have the full features yet, because Apple makes a big deal about sharing information off the device. And one of the main features of Dice in the full version is the ability to connect with other devices quickly and share information. So here's a description of Dice, and here's some clips of stuff that I created with Dice. This is primarily, my goal is to make it make all the sensors on the device accessible. The GPS, the accelerometer, the gyroscope. There's about 6 sensors in there, and the art that's created with this particular one is the sensor. The accelerometer is traditionally just used to let the computer the device know if it's facing up or down or left or right, flip from portrait. But it's actually giving you a lot of data, and I just translate that data to these brush strokes. And play around with that. So that's Dice. That's my latest project. I hope to attract people to both use it and build on top of it. So it's in private beta now, but eventually it'll be open source. So you can get access to it to build it either for your desktop or your iDevices by contacting me. Just backpedaling a little bit. This issue of all this content in Director and Flash, that's going to evaporate because the players for it are proprietary. Some people are doing some crazy stuff to work around it. One is this guy. He contacted me through Facebook. Again, I won't try to pronounce his name. He's from the Netherlands, I think. Eugene. I can say his first name, I think. Yeah, Eugene. He is trying to create a player for Director content, independent of Director. So if you have the data, the CDs with Total Distortion or your favorite, art piece done in Director, his goal is so you can use this open source software it's called very pleasingly Scum. Scum VM. That's designed to play a wide variety of games. From the DOS, from the ancient times. So he's writing a plugin to that to play Director content. He reached out to me to ask for help. I couldn't help him other than to say, forward his request to people I knew formerly at Director. But this is his goal. He wants to. It's not. He doesn't want to do all of Director. He's focused on Director 4, which was the first version that went cross-platform. So it's achievable, but he's going to have a hard time without the source. One possibility is hopefully Adobe will wake up one day and say it's in the public good to release enough of the software as open source that other people can keep the content alive, and releasing it to somebody like this who's very motivated and is willing to do the work of re-implementing it would make his life a lot easier. So hope, if Adobe, if you're out there, help this guy out. You know, give him a break. He's doing a public service. He's preserving a cultural legacy. Okay, Adobe, hope you're listening.
I'm going to come in and ask a couple questions.
Sure, yeah.
So that was actually one of my questions you just touched on, is like, what do we do about all this stuff? Because, for example, my first homework assignment when I was a student in ITP in 2001 is a director program, and I have a .dir file somewhere. And I was actually looking for it. I was like, oh, maybe I'll bring it and try to show it. And so is there anything that you think that we as a community of kind of creative coders who are working in open source can do? You did really just address this, but to make the case for it, or
I think that there's some. I know I think there's a petition, like an online petition for Flash. So, and I think it has like 10,000 signatures or something. So, it would need to be something like that. And then there are people, the digital archivists, that are worried about this thing. So maybe align with them, or just lending them support, saying yes, we would like this.
We've also, like, one project that the community did was to recreate a version of John Maida's artwork, 12 Clocks, which was only available in this like Mac OS version for like, and so that also could be. It's not a foolproof avenue, but if also like recoding certain things in modern environments is something that also.
And if you have access to the source, then that's easy to do.
And that's also like another question that I have is, having worked now on environments like processing, which are kind of like volunteer driven, we have a nonprofit now that tries to maintain it. There's platforms like Open Frameworks and different open source, open source projects. What was it like to work on Lingo, which is, I think, very spiritually aligned with these kind of like environments we used to teach now, but driven by a company? Did you have to like check in on a regular basis? How did that process work?
Okay, that's actually good. I have a screen here for that. Let me bring it up. So when I was working as a freelancer for a consultant to Macromind, which became a Macromedia. So I was doing artwork with stuff that I wrote, and back then everything software was open source. Right. It wasn't different. So I would share what I was working at MIT, so I would share the code that I wrote with them, and I would take code that somebody had written on one computer and move it from the architecture machine group to the VLW. So it just flowed. Software was meant to flow, So that was the expectancy. So when I was when Macromedia hired me, they told me that I had to sign something that said anything I invent from then on was theirs. So I put together a list of stuff that I had invented up to that point, so they couldn't touch me. So I have the interactive bed, a shadow canvas, which was an image processing thing, picture piano, which was this Laserdisc thing, and I think a chatterbox, which was an early interpreter, which was based on Lisp, the Lisp idea. And I used Lisp for my interactive artwork because it was easy to put together quickly, and I didn't have to go recompile the program all the time. And I built an editor, a Lisp C interpreter, all this crap, so it's not crap, it's all the software. And in fact, I don't have it anymore. Yeah. All I have is this list. It's gone. It's on some floppy, or it's on a computer that's, dead now. So it was, there's a lot, so to answer your question, it made sense for me because I wanted to get paid, right. And I kind of insured myself by listing these things. So in case there was a problem, I could say, this was my prior art, So.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I was just actually at the Library of Congress a couple of weeks ago, and I was looking at some of their archives, and they've got all these floppy disks. They're just sitting there, and there's
so that's the artifact, right. just a physical thing.
And there are people there though who are working on trying to let me find this old computer, and so the more that we can do to try to preserve, because I think also especially like we have. It's easy to have this sort of tendency of thinking of everything that we're doing with technology as like a week old.
Yeah.
But these ideas have happened over and over again. It's just
and it's good to put a little effort into preserving it for your own thing. So I'm learning that now. I got contacted by the the National Museum of African American Art, History, and Culture a couple of years ago, and they're interested in this stuff. So even just to have the whatever physical thing that's a remnant of it is good.
Right. Well, if there's any archivists out there watching, get in touch, leave a comment. We'd love to, I'd love to, help be a force for archiving history and legacy. Thank you so much for coming and presenting about your work.
You're welcome.
Again, if you have a question or a comment, you can leave it in the comments below. And all the links that were shown during this video, everything you can find, you can click in the description as well. So thanks so much. It's an honor to have you here and to learn a bit about the history of the stuff that I'm trying to do on this channel. And so thanks again so much.
Okay, thank you for having me. It's great to be back.
Just want to thank so much John Henry Thompson for taking the time to stop by here to tell us about his work. I hope he encourage you to check out the links to look at his new project Dice. And to see what he's working on these days. I also wanted to mention, I really am kicking myself because I forgot to ask about how he got started with computers, which is a wonderful story about his time. He's a native New Yorker. He went to Bronx Science. He went to MIT. So there's so much more. We'll have to have John Henry Thompson back again. So thank you so much, John, for being here. And I hope that make sure you check out his YouTube channel as well, and I'll link to everything in the description. So thanks so much, and can't wait to hear what you think about this video. Please ask your questions in the comments, and I'll try to relay any of them to him and answer them. Okay, thanks so much. Bye-bye.